Babita Deokaran was someone that did the right thing, and she paid for it with her life. She was gunned down after she dropped off her child at school on a random August morning.
She was ruthlessly assassinated right here at this spot when she parked her car, and she was waiting for the driveway gate to open, and the assassins just came in and they shot her 12 times.
In the weeks before Babita Deokaran was assassinated, she stumbled across a surge of suspicious payments, predominantly out of Tembisa Hospital. She didn't know it at the time, but what she had found was the first shades of a massive extraction syndicate. She was afraid that stopping the flow of this money could put her life in danger, and those were fears that were eventually realized. After she was assassinated, her findings were covered up and the money kept flowing. This is a story about more than just the taxpayer's rand. It's about a woman who lost her life because she did the right thing. She leaves behind her family. She also leaves behind a teenage daughter who's now an orphan. Her life will never be the same, and that's because of greed and corruption. When News24 started the story, we set out with a goal in mind that we wanted to finish what Babita began. We will make sure that her death will not be in vain and that she won't be silenced.
We are actually sitting in Babita's childhood home. We were all very, very close. We are 8 siblings. Babita was the 6th of the 8 siblings. We were all extremely close to each other. We bonded, we shared, we never fought over anything. Babita was very, very highly intelligent. We realized that when she was very little. She could read before she could go to school, which was unheard of. She enjoyed working with numbers and she always wanted to be an accountant. As soon as she finished matric, she started working at a very, very early age. And she studied and paid for her own studies thereafter. She was very committed to her work. If there was an 8-day week, she would be working those 8 days. She had very maternal instincts. She was a go-getter. When people visited, she used to go all out to ensure that they enjoyed their stay there, taking them out, preparing meals, showing them Johannesburg, which we had never been to before until she moved up there.
This here is the entrance to her humble abode. There's ample memories in this house here, not just for me, for the entire family. Wherever you had come from, you were always welcome in this house here. This is the dining room. So at this table here, I can't even imagine how many people sat and ate meals around this table at any given point in time. All her meals were always tasty. She used to always try varieties and different things. Always. Whatever she watched on cooking channels, she will try and emulate it. This here is her kitchen. This was her forte. This was where she spent most of her time in this house when she was not working or not sleeping. This was the only place that you'd find her. She'd actually start cooking sometimes at 6 o'clock in the morning. As you can see, ample pots, all her stuff, spick and span. With her, everything had to be to the point, to the point.
She was like my best friend, you know, she was very kind. Everybody like that knew her, loved her. I feel like most people that if you had to ask about her, they would have good things to say. I was really spoiled, so anything I wanted, she'd be like, okay, let's go get it. Once she actually woke up at 5 a.m. because I wanted these pair of Jordans and they were releasing at like 7 or 8, and then we had to wake up at 5 a.m. and go to Mall of Africa so we could pick them up. I ended up getting the last size 5 shoe that was there. I really thought she was just an accountant and just doing normal stuff. So I never really took time to think or ask what she's doing. I only knew after what happened that, oh, she was doing this, this, and this. It was more of she comes home, she does work. You know, I thought it was like everybody's normal office job, you know.
She never divulged anything about work. Be it she's here at home or be it she was by my place or wherever, if she's working, she'll just sit and go on with her business. Even if she was at home, she would still be on her laptop doing work. She just simply loved her work. She loved what she did.
It was completely normal. She'd go to work, then she'd pick me up, then she'd come home, she'd do her work. So that's why it was more of a surprise for everyone, because everything was normal the days leading up to it.
All heard about the murder of someone in the south of Johannesburg that morning. News24 carried an initial story, but given the rough and tumble of news and the news cycle, I don't think it's a murder that we initially gave too much attention. I think our interest was piqued when it became clear during the course of the day, if I remember correctly, that she was a senior financial official at the Provincial Department of Health at Gauteng. And that immediately set the alarm bells off. Our interest was piqued because she was a senior government financial official, a provincial government official. And then we just started following the story to see where it was going. And Jeff, who was and still is someone who has a very deep interest in and good contacts around the criminal justice system, be it the police, the Hawks, the Special Investigating Unit, the National Prosecuting Authority, was a natural fit for someone to look at this story, to try and get behind the story, to try and figure out what was behind this. He really started following what was happening in court. And then we started looking at the background of these alleged murderers. And it really was Jeff that said, look, he thinks that there's something more to it. And we made it part of our investigations team planning every week. Jeff was extraordinarily dogged in his approach to the story.
I think for me, it's fairly clear that the murder of Babita Deokaran had a very specific and intended purpose. She was a known whistleblower, and if you examine the circumstances of the crime, it's not as if this was a random act of violence or a robbery. There was clear motive behind her death. And it's an inescapable conclusion that we've arrived at, that she must have been looking into someone and compromised their source of income, and by so doing, placed a target on her back. Beyond that, Babita Deokaran was a human being. And I think if this case is anything, it's a study of how corruption is not a victimless crime. I first heard that Babita Deokaran had been murdered on that Monday afternoon when she was assassinated. It was an extremely busy time for South Africa. We were still in the grip of COVID. We'd just come off the back of the unrest which had brought Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal to its knees. So there was a lot going on. What we did quickly realize was that Babita Deokaran's killing was going to dominate the headlines. And we picked up on the investigation shortly after she was murdered. I think it became fairly obvious early on that given the person that Babita Deokaran was, that it was important that we try and understand everything about her killing. We know from looking at the contents of her cell phone that Babita Deokaran woke up shortly after 6 o'clock on the day of her death.
I spoke to her that morning on the chat, not over the phone, but on the chat. The past few weeks before that, she was having some problem with her fingers. I think it was, hurting because it was still a bit cold. So that morning I asked her, how are your fingers? Then she told me, no, it's improving, it's coming right a little bit. It must have been just after 6 o'clock, I think.
It was a Monday morning. We were all at work. It was a normal Monday morning, everyone get to their routine.
From court filings, we understand that she dropped her daughter at school and then went to Checkers to buy groceries. And that's the first record that the police were able to find of people on her tail. CCTV footage exists of her checking out the till and other men, supposedly her killers, close on her heels. From Checkers, she took a short drive to her home, and as she nosed her car into the driveway after picking up her helper on the side of the road, a white BMW pulled up alongside her, and 3 gunmen, using handguns, peppered the side of her car with bullets. She was shot 12 times, and she sat bleeding in the seat of her car until paramedics arrived.
If my memory serves me correctly, it must have been about 9:15, or between 9 9:15, that my brother-in-law called me to tell me what happened. And I don't live far from here. It's under a kilometer. So I was here in like under a minute. But by then she was already inside the ambulance. I thought it was probably just like a robbery or a hijack or something. But when I got here to the vehicle, absolutely nothing was stolen. The car was just as it is. I had told my sister and my wife to follow the ambulance to the hospital, and I waited here. I just didn't know what to do. I just sat across against the wall opposite the gate. Just looking at the car itself was too traumatic for me. We tried getting an update, but she was in theater with the doctor, so my sister and my wife could not tell us much as well, because they were not given any information at that time. Then my wife phoned me and says to me, no, I need to fetch Tiara from school and bring her to the hospital. It was extremely difficult. I mean, I didn't know what to tell the child.
So I was at school actually, and I was in the middle of class, and then my deputy principal calls my teacher that I was with at that time. She's like, can Tiara please come to the office with her bag? So I'm like, why am I getting picked up early? So anyways, I go, and then like my principal and then my uncle and my cousin were there. And I'm like, why are they here? So anyways, we go, and then me in the car, I thought I was literally in trouble for something. And then they were just like, no, we're going to the hospital. And I'm like, why? And then, yeah.
I was at school when my daughter phoned me to say that this has happened to Bata, but we don't have much details. And then I phoned my brother-in-law. I was frantic. The 4 siblings and my brother-in-law, immediately in about 10-15 minutes, we just threw things together and we had left Durban. We had no details whatsoever, none whatsoever. We just knew that she had been shot and had been taken to a hospital. That was all the information we had at that time. We didn't know the seriousness of her injuries or anything like that. In fact, at the back of my mind, I'm thinking, when they said outside her gate, I'm thinking possible hijacking. And I didn't think that it was going to be, this kind of seriousness. We had passed halfway. We still didn't know that she had passed on. And while traveling, we eventually got to know about it. We just pulled off on the side of the road and we all broke down into tears.
The key question that we wanted to answer was the why. Who would have a motive to kill this person? And over the past year, we've slowly gotten closer to who we think could have been behind her murder. In essence, people had 850 million reasons to make her go away. So we started this investigation, and our first point of focus was obviously the criminal investigation into a murder and the hitmen who were arrested a couple of days after the killings. And that's what I like to call phase 1 of the investigation. And that part of the investigation took us to KwaZulu-Natal, and we were able to ascertain that 5 of the 6 men who were arrested for a killing all came from the same valley, and they'd gathered in that valley at their traditional homes 2 weeks before her murder. That means if the state's case against them proves true, the plans to assassinate her were already in motion. So much of what we do in investigative journalism relies on informants. And during the course of this story and producing it, we've managed to shake the tree enough that people have been willing to come forward and give us information. And it was an incredible day when we got the call to let us know that we would have access to 60,000 emails and the contents of Babita's cell phone, because that's what was missing all along. We were desperately trying to understand who would have had motive to kill her. And within minutes of accessing the data, we already had a list of suspects. And then we started following the money. The difficulty in a story like this when you're faced with an overwhelming amount of information is sifting the wheat from the chaff. And it's just a painstaking process working through it methodically and chronologically. And it was easy for us in that Babita was an impeccable record keeper, and she had a lot of information that we were able to see, especially when you consider the messages. And she unwittingly set out a timeline for us of the last month of her life. And it's been central in what we've done here in terms of taking her conversations with confidants and friends and colleagues and cross-matching that with what we found on the emails. And fairly quickly, we were able to see exactly what she feared the most. So this is a report that Babita Deokaran filed 3 weeks before her murder. And it's become essentially the spine of our investigation. And it sets out what she found at Tembisa Hospital before her assassination. And there's several key elements of this report which have become key tropes in this investigation as we move forward. And the first one is the opening line of the report, where she makes it clear that she notified acting CFO Lorato Maggio of her concerns about Tembisa Hospital spending patterns. And she says it there in the opening line of the report, to provide this report to the acting CFO as a follow-up to a telephonic discussion. Now that's important because it will prevent any sort of ignorance defense on the part of Maggio in explaining what she did or failed to do after Babita came to her. And that's something that we've honed in on. But the report goes on to sort of distill Babita Deokaran's reason for concerns. And it all relates to a spending pattern out of this hospital which sits on the East Rand. And she looked at their buying patterns, the number of purchase orders they processed, an array of key metrics, and compared them to other hospitals in Gauteng's network. When you consider this one table, it's incredibly important because it looks at purchase orders in a 1 month span across all of the facilities in Gauteng. And it's very strange that Tembisa Hospital, which is in essence a tertiary facility, is spending exponentially more than other hospitals in the network. And when you look at the number of purchase orders which were processed by the hospital compared to other facilities in the network, Tembisa Hospital is a clear frontrunner, dwarfed only in value by the health department's head office. And if you look at the number of records, it's nearly double the next hospital in the queue. But Deokaran then went further and said the reason for my concern is the amount or the value of these purchase orders, which is key in this, because beneath the threshold of 500,000 Rand, and you avoid a public and rigorous tender process. Under that threshold, the procurement can be undertaken at the hospital exclusively. And that was obviously a point of concern for her. So in the space of 4 months, she looked at how many purchase orders under that value Tembisa Hospital pushed through its system. And the numbers speak for themselves. I mean, 1,232 individual orders compared to Charlotte Maxeke Academic Hospital with 84. It's an exponential rise. She even provided a list of suppliers that she felt were dubious. And this is the list, and all of the money that they earned. So we were given a window into a hospital's buying patterns. Everything from the vegetables and the food that they feed the patients to high-tech medical equipment. And there are some egregiously blatant purchases that came out of Tembisa Hospital that made you question, how is it possible that we are spending government money on things like skinny jeans or 100 leather wingback chairs? There's even an instance where a company which was formed only 1 month before sold arts and craft supplies to the hospital to the value of 500,000 Rand. So that makes you wonder that the people who were behind this network of extraction, both inside the hospital and at the provincial head office, did so knowing that they could push through the most obscene and irrelevant orders and they would face no consequence for this. The parting shot in her report, which was, despite what the health department would have people believe, widely circulated amongst their leadership, was that she called for an urgent investigation. And this is the line here. It's recommended that the acting CFO, through the head of department, request an investigation into these companies, as well as the procurement transactions relating to them. That's something that never happened. And that is one of the great injustices of Babita Deokaran's murder, that she died reporting a crime that was essentially buried. And now we have a teenage girl who is an orphan. Her family are left with a gaping hole because of her loss. How we've moved along from that point is basically trying to follow the money, looking at the companies that she identified and taking her work further and trying to understand who are the people behind these faceless entities. And after doing several hundred company searches, we established that there were syndicates, or at least patterns in the way that companies were formed. Now, as we sit here, we've managed to establish that there were at least 54 shell corporations which were established with the primary purpose of extracting cash. It's worth noting that these companies used fake addresses and existed only on paper. They had no public presence, and importantly, they had no license to trade in high-tech medical gear. And that's to the detriment of the patients, because instead of goods and services that are required to run a hospital in an impoverished area, it was channeled to people who had no business seeing that money in their bank accounts. So right now we're in Duduza on the eastern expanses of the city, and we're going to the address which on paper appears to be a company that sells medical supplies, and they were a key supplier of Tembisa Hospital. The company is called Avegis, and in the space of 6 weeks the company scored millions worth in contracts to supply medical goods, everything from gloves to surgical drapes to ventilators. It's part of our process. How we've approached the story is trying to understand the legitimacy of these companies. And the first step in that was going to their offices, because considering the amount of businesses that was channeled towards this firm in particular, one would expect offices, at the very least warehouse space, to house all of the goods. And what we found is kind of in step with what we've found throughout this investigation, is that these companies existed only on paper. The addresses that were used to register them were false. And in this instance, the so-called office of the company named Avegis is a dilapidated building that hasn't been in use for years. It's in front of us now.
Of the building is my late father, Kebani Moloi, and my mother, Lillian Moloi, and I'm currently the manager of the building. Okay, at first it was a spa that was owned by my dad, and then afterwards it was leased by ShopRite USAfe, and then they leased it for about 10 years, and then after that it's been empty. We've been using it for events when people want to hire it out on weekends. It's been empty about 5 to 4 years, yes, along those lines. On our side, we have no lease agreement with anyone. We have never manufactured pills. So no, it was the first time when you guys came in contact with us. It makes me very angry because whoever's in charge of procurement or whatever they call it should have double checked whose property it is and what's going on with that property. So no one came to us, no one asked us anything. Clearly to them we are inferior, if that's the word I can use. Because it took my father a long time and hard work for him to build this building. And vice versa, we're trying to sustain it and keep it going as his legacy. So something like this that happens, it makes one very angry that someone can just pop up from anywhere and take over your own property, which is, I think, is very unfair.
So during the course of this investigation, we try to understand who was being paid in this process, who was the ultimate beneficiary of this largesse. And almost at the outset, we established that lucrative contracts were channeled to those who were politically connected, and chief among them is the ANC's Ekurhuleni Treasurer General Selo Sokoko, who in the period of 3 years scored 15 million rand in contracts. He operates 3 companies through which this money was channeled. Only one has a website, none have warehouses or storage facilities, but they simply keep getting business from government hospitals across the network. So as this investigation has moved forward, we've highlighted the role of one particular individual, and that's Hangwani Morgan Maumela. Our sources inside the Department of Health told us that he's referred to as the Don of Tembisa, that he holds sway with management and with their procurement office. And that's borne out by the fact that within 3 years, he's scored nearly 400 million rands worth of business from primarily Tembisa Hospital and other hospitals in the network. What's important to remember when we talk about Hangwani Morgan Maumela is his presidential connection. He is nephew to President Cyril Ramaphosa from a previous marriage, and the links to the president run even deeper because he lives in a plush residential estate in Sandton, and his neighbor is a man by the name of Bejani Chauke, who happens to be the president's principal political advisor. I have no doubt that Babita Deokaran made enemies during the course of her work. She had been a critical witness for the SIU in more than 100 investigations, so any number of people may have had a motive to harm her. She was a key whistleblower in PPE fraud during the COVID-19 pandemic that saw politicians and powerful actors in her own department fired. And, when we look at what happened in Tembisa, the timing is too much of a coincidence. She also warned several days before her murder that she was worried about stopping payments to the Tembisa guys and that her life might be in danger. I think that she had a sense of foreboding about who she was dealing with. She understood that there was a powerful syndicate or groups of syndicates operating at Tembisa Hospital who would take steps to eliminate her if she threatened their source of income. And, you know, obviously this is the subject of a police investigation, but if I was a detective, knowing what I know now, Tembisa Hospital would be the first place I look in terms of who had motive to get rid of her.
These investigations and the investigations into Babita Deokaran was very important from a public interest point of view. From a journalistic point of view, it was a challenging investigation because of the stakes involved. You know, there were times that I was afraid for the safety of Jeff and my team's members. If they were willing to kill a senior financial official at the Gauteng Department of Health, I think they'd have no qualms in taking out a journalist who is about to expose their hiddenmost secrets. So there were times where we thought we are now treading on a tiger's tail, but no one backed off from it, least of all Jeff. Who ran into the story with an open mind and strong enthusiasm to do what needs to be done. We can put everything that we've got, all the information that we have, we can put in the public domain. We can hope that the police acts on it, that the National Prosecuting Authority acts on it. But we're journalists. We aren't private investigators, we aren't police officers, and we aren't public prosecutors. And we hope that a story like this leads to prosecutions, leads to people being held accountable. Because if people aren't held accountable, then we are on our way to becoming a mafia state.
It's been difficult the past year, over the year, and we won't want to wish this on any family. We as a family keep reliving it.
This morning marks a very sad day in the life of the Deokaran family. We are here to live her legacy, and we are here to mark this day exactly 1 year since that fateful day when Babita was gunned down at this very spot, the entrance of her home. Today we remember our beloved sister as a hero, as someone that lived a life of integrity and died for her honesty. She laid her life down for truth, and today we mark that day in remembrance of her, knowing that her memories will live on with us.
Whistleblowers have an enormously important role to play in society. We know that the NPA, the police, the Hawks, many other institutions over the last decade have been hollowed out. One institution that has not been hollowed out is investigative journalism. There are a number of strong investigative outfits in the country, not only News24, and we rely very heavily on the access that whistleblowers are willing and able to give us. And we're very thankful for that. We know it's dangerous. We know that people put their lives at risk, their futures at risk, their livelihoods at risk. But, you know, I think we're all working very hard to make this democracy work, to save it from corruption, to save it from sinking into the morass of poor governance and increased corruption and increased criminality. So just as we have a role to play, and just as the police and law enforcement authorities have a role to play, whistleblowers are absolutely key to what we do. And we've been very lucky in the last year or so with whistleblowers trusting us and trusting us enough to share confidential and explosive information with us. And Babita Deokaran is the prime example of that.
Okay, there's some refreshments.
We are here a year later to pay tribute, to remember, but more importantly, to rededicate ourselves to continue the fight, the struggle that people like Babita and many others who have paid the kind of ultimate sacrifice that we need to continue.
Some of us have called us whistling healers. They've mocked us. It is what it is. This is my tribute to Babita. As a single mother of a 19-year-old, I thank God to still be alive.
Well, Martha Ngoyi is one of the best examples of a whistleblower who was trying to do the right thing and is now carrying the punitive consequences of that. She was one of the big whistleblowers at PRASA. You'd recall that billions of rand was spent on locomotives that were ill-suited to the South African environment. She exposed the links between certain companies like Swifambo and dirty dealings around the ANC, specifically around the former president, Jacob Zuma. But she's now paying the price for that. She testified at the Zondo Commission.
It's your affidavit, is that correct?
It is my affidavit, Chair.
But she's being sued by PRASA. And we're in a post-state capture era, supposedly, and one of the whistleblowers that exposed state capture is being persecuted by that same state that is now professing to attempt to turn itself around. So she is someone that's very vocal and in public about what she found.
In my position, I was hauled to Parliament to go and explain some of these issues.
Yeah.
I've explained them to the highest office, Parliament, and nothing happened.
And she's now been suspended, she's being sued, and she's still suffering persecution because of that. She's a whistleblower, and she's being treated atrociously by the post-state capture environment.
I didn't go out to be a whistleblower. I was just doing my job as is required and was required of me in that particular position. My life has been turned upside down. As it is currently, my debts are huge because I can't afford it. The lawyers are always asking for their monies. I can't afford it. I'm fighting this on my own with my resources. And state coffers are used to fight against me. And it's difficult to match that. So that is why, from a psychological perspective, from a health perspective, trauma, we've begged for financial assistance. We've gone everywhere to put our case to say, look, this is what we have. We haven't done this. When you're termed a whistleblower, you're seen as that villain, as that leper, because nobody wants to touch you. You're a problem. There is absolutely nothing wrong that I have done to warrant so much persecution. But it's there. There was nothing that Babita did that was wrong. As we remember her merciless murder, we are encouraged to carry on, to fight on, to not be afraid. So when Babita was murdered, her murder sent chills down my spine because I thought, my God, there is a possibility. There's a lot of transactions that we've blocked, with billions of rands. People are not necessarily happy with us. Now, if we're talking about hundreds of millions within Babita's case, how vulnerable, was it in my case? Because it's not only millions, it is billions as well. So where we just stood our ground and we said it's not happening. So one doesn't know, but my family has been concerned about my safety. So normally what I would do when I drive late at night is I would always have a friend on the phone, and I had to talk to him until I get home, so that at least there is conversation happening, and should anything happen to me, he would be aware of what might have happened. And I sometimes, send locations to him of where I am. And that's how I've navigated this thing. But, one continues to live life. I can't just be paranoid. Chief Justice Zondo indicated that the whistleblowers need to be protected and, raised various concerns around what needs to happen and so on.
One of the things we need to remember as we seek to ensure that we are ready to tackle any future state capture and corruption is that the protection of whistleblowers is paramount.
And the president was also at the State Capture Committee to say, look, yes, there is a need to protect whistleblowers. What has been done? Nothing.
If we do not as a country look after these whistleblowers who helped the country during state capture, they will not be available next time we need them.
I don't have any faith that anything is going to be done for the protection of whistleblowers, even for ensuring that the financial burden that we have suffered will be compensated. I don't know, probably when we are dead, our kids will get to enjoy that. But currently, I don't see it happening.
As the ANC's Electoral Committee is getting set to announce top 6 nominations, last week we saw government standing firm on its final offer, but this was met with a...
My name is Mandy Wiener. I am a journalist, I'm a broadcaster, I'm an author, and I wrote a book called The Whistleblowers. Sadly, the story of Babita Deokaran is not unique. There have been many whistleblowers in post-democratic South Africa that have been killed for trying to expose corruption, for trying to put the brakes on fraudulent and dodgy payments. You look at somebody like Mos Pakwe in the Rustenburg municipality. There are many stories like this where people are killed because they try and blow the whistle. What tends to happen to whistleblowers in South Africa is that they are treated as pariahs, as impimpies, that they're seen as problematic, as troublemakers. They are pushed to the fringes of society. They wear the scarlet letter W. Nobody wants to touch them. Some of the whistleblowers I've interviewed have ended up with PTSD. Their families have fallen apart. They've really struggled to cope. The emotional trauma and the burden of facing this kind of pressure is really enormous. And many of them, unfortunately, their families don't support them. So they really have a rough time of it because they feel compelled to do the right thing, but their families aren't necessarily in support of it. In some instances, whistleblowers have told me about threats on their lives, about how they've been followed, they've been monitored, they've been tracked, they've been bullied and intimidated. They are bullied through the courts, as an example, as well. And this is really concerning because whistleblowers are not protected. Many of the whistleblowers say that the Protected Disclosures Act is simply not worth the paper that it's written on. It is archaic, it is more of a labor law, a type of piece of legislation, and what we really need is an overhaul of the legislation in South Africa. Ours has been described as a dinosaur. And Chief Justice Zondo himself has acknowledged this. The President has spoken about it as well. The Justice Minister, Ronald Lamola, says that they are currently working on new legislation, and this has to happen because currently the legislation is completely inadequate. At the moment, there are civil society organizations that are doing incredible work. And that's where whistleblowers turn, is to the civil society organizations, not to the state. We need to change the way that whistleblowers are treated, what their fate is, how they are protected. Otherwise, we'll never be able to stop corruption. The story of Babita is not unique, but we have to make sure that it doesn't happen in the future. And that's why I do hope that the murder of Babita will be a catalyst to see the change in legislation and to heighten pressure on government to do something about it.
Thousands of workers expected to stop working. They're demanding a better deal. The government departments from Home Affairs and licensing departments are going to see a disruption today. Last week.
The problem that Babita exposed is the extent and the depth to which corruption has become endemic in government at all three levels. National, we know. Provincial, which is where Babita operated, and we know at municipal level it's even worse. The problem that Babita was facing was that, yes, there are legislative safeguards in place, like the Public Finance Management Act, various other laws, regulations, to try and make sure that public funds are managed responsibly and that resources reach its intended endpoint. Now, what Babita found was that if everyone from the point of extraction to the point of delivery is in on it, then it doesn't help. One honest government official, public official, unfortunately is unable to make a difference. And that's the saddest thing. She was killed to try and make a difference. It's almost 2 years since she was killed now. No one's in jail. The alleged murderers have not given up who ordered the hit. What we do know is, thanks to News24 and Jeff Wicks's reporting, that millions and millions of rand, even billions of rand, have been extracted from the Gauteng Department of Health. This is but one department in one provincial government and one financial officer's findings that we've had access to. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of instances like this across the country. And if there's no political will to tackle this problem, if law enforcement does not have the resources to properly investigate and prosecute and convict criminals, then we're going to see more Babita Deokarans. I think Babita Deokaran, the story, really became the biggest story in our team last year. Because of the reach of the story, it wasn't only about a random murder in the south of Johannesburg. It was about revealing the extent of the capture of government entities, of government bodies, of a provincial government, the extent and the depth of rot and corruption in a department. And it was the first time in a long while in which we were able to personalize corruption in the way that we were able to with Babita Deokaran's murder.
I miss a lot of things. I miss watching TV with her, so that's how I grew to like Bollywood movies, because we used to watch a lot of it. And I miss baking and cooking with her, and I also miss her food. She used to make really nice pasta, mutton curry and biryani, so I really miss those.
I miss her voice. I miss her chubby hands. The special occasions that we celebrate, family functions that she won't be a part of anymore. She used to be the most excited if there was a wedding or a prayer or any little thing. And she was also very generous at heart. She had a very, very big heart. No matter who you were, what you did, if you needed her help, she was always ready to assist.
We still feel the same. All the memories, all that happened on the day is still fresh. It's as though it happened yesterday. So we still hurt, we are still in so much of pain. We think about her all the time and we hear her voice all the time. We wish we could talk to her. We wish we could receive those chats from her.
I feel connected to Babita Deokaran. You know, obviously I never had the opportunity to meet her, but I have spoken to many of her family members at length about her life. Also, given the information we've managed to obtain during the course of this investigation, and I feel like I've been given a window into her personal life. And for all intents and purposes, she was a very quiet woman, someone who was just resolute in doing her job and doing the right thing. And you know, the perception of Babita Deokaran has been unanimous. This is not a person that was beset by scandal or politically inclined. All she wanted to do was to do her job properly as a civil servant, and unfortunately doing her job properly saw her pay the ultimate price.
I feel like this is now putting people in a more difficult situation, because now on one hand, do they want to do the right thing and speak out, but on the other hand, they're going to be in so much of danger if they do. So it's going to like stop people from doing the right thing. So I think the government should like work harder on putting protection for these people, or making like some other ways to report these things anonymously, because now people are going to be more reluctant to report anything that they find. It might inspire them, but then also at the back of the head, it's like, am I going to risk my whole life doing this knowing I have a family?
She loved this country with her last heartbeat. She would have done anything for this country. It's just a pity that we have lost such a gem in this country. You know, after what happened to Babita, we would just love for them to get proper protection, not just by the way protection. They need to be guarded. Because I even said recently as well, I actually call them a rare species, which needs to be guarded properly.
We want heads to roll. We want justice, that's all. We want justice for our little sister. We want names mentioned. We want to name and shame them. The country needs to know, the whole world needs to know what happened to her and who were the masterminds behind this. I think once that is achieved, we will receive some kind of solace as well. Because otherwise we are going to continue grieving and thinking, you know, it could have been different.
Based on the findings of a possible syndicate activity, corruption, fraud, and irregular appointment of service providers, which led to this irregular expenditure, the SIU has applied for the presidential proclamation, and we have supported this initiative. Some of the work that the SIU did, the leads came from the News24 story as well, and they followed and they also find some and confirmed all the things.
set me free.